Then Saul dressed David in his own gear, putting a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David strapped his sword on over the armor, but he couldn't walk around well because he'd never tried it before. "I can't walk in this," David told Saul, "because I've never tried it before." So he took all of it off. He then grabbed his staff and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream bed. He put them in a pocket of his shepherd's bag and with sling in hand went out to the Philistine. The Philistine got closer and closer to David, and his shield bearer was in front of him. When the Philistine looked David over, he sneered at David because he was just a boy, reddish-brown and good-looking. The Philistine asked David, "Am I some sort of dog that you come at me with sticks?" And he cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said to David, "and I'll feed your flesh to the wild birds and the wild animals." But David told the Philistine, "You are coming against me with sword, spear, and scimitar, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel's army, the one you've insulted. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will feed your dead body and the dead bodies of the entire Philistine camp to the wild birds and the wild animals. Then the whole world will know that there is a God on Israel's side. And all those gathered here will know that the Lord doesn't save by means of sword and spear. The Lord owns this war, and he will hand all of you over to us." Now the Philistine got up and moved closer to attack David, and David ran quickly to the front line to face him. David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. He slung it and hit the Philistine on his forehead. The stone penetrated his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. And that's how David triumphed over the Philistine with just a sling and a stone, striking the Philistine down and killing him. And David didn't even have a sword. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. He grabbed the Philistine's sword, drew it from its sheath, and finished him off. Then David cut off the Philistine's head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they fled. The soldiers from Israel and Judah jumped up with a shout and chased the Philistines all the way to Gath and the gates of Ekron. The dead Philistines were littered along the Sherm road all the way to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites came back from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put the Philistine's weapons in his own tent. Now when Saul saw David go out to meet the Philistine, he asked Abner, the army general, "Abner, whose son is that boy?" "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know," Abner answered. "Then find out whose son that young man is," the king replied. So when David came back from killing the Philistine, Abner sent for him and presented him to Saul. The Philistine's head was still in David's hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, my boy?" "I'm the son of your servant Jesse from Bethlehem," David answered. This is the word of God for all people.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Woo! A lot of Bible. It's a long story, and we know the smallest part of it. We know the part with David and Goliath, with the sling and the stone and the falling on the ground. And that takes place in like 4 verses. But as you see, there are 58 verses of story here. And so we need to look at all of the story to understand it better. For 40 days, he comes out and Goliath taunts and challenges the Israelites. "Send out one of you to challenge me." He insults them. He insults their God. And for 40 days, they cower and run, and they do not fight him. For 40 days. So finally, this young boy happens to be there, right? Bringing some food for his brothers. And he's like, we all standing around? What's going on? Thought we were supposed to be here to fight a war. And then he sees the big guy. He's like, "Who dat?" And then all the soldiers are like, "That's Goliath. Hush. If he hears you talking, he'll think you're challenging him." So he starts asking everybody, well, who is this guy? And why aren't we fighting him? And why are we allowing him to insult God? Don't we have God on our side? Isn't our God the God? But all anyone can say is, hey, Saul's going to make whoever gets rid of this guy real rich. He ain't going to have to pay any taxes. Surprised nobody jumped at that one. And yet still nobody, the promise of wealth, marriage into the kingship, no taxes, jumps at this opportunity. They're all too afraid. And finally, David, little David, says, I think I'll do this. So Saul gives him the best armor that he has, and it's too big. David can't wear it. It's too heavy. So he takes what he knows. He takes a staff, and he takes a sling, and he takes some rocks. The tools of the shepherd's trade. And he goes out, and he faces him. And he bests Goliath, and we know that part. But it gets a little more graphic after that part, doesn't it? Yeah, they don't cover this part in VeggieTales. He kills Goliath in a rather gruesome fashion, and then the Israelites kill as many of the Philistines as they can catch as they chase them all the way back, and then they steal all of their stuff. And then, after all of that has happened, somebody finally asks the question that we are all thinking, that all the soldiers are thinking, except for the three that are his brothers. Somebody finally asks the question, whose kid is this? That's a good question to ask. Maybe they should have asked that ahead of time, but here they are, they're saying, whose kid is this? And last week we talked about how Samuel was sent to anoint the next king of Israel because Saul isn't on good terms with God. And Samuel anoints David. And so we see David here, he's a little bit older, but he trusts in God. And he has been sent by God, and he has been commissioned by God and for God. And nobody knows who he is yet. But he knows what he has been called to, and he trusts in God. And so he stands up to this person who is gigantic, armed with only the barest of things and the trust of God. And he does something so spectacular that everybody can't help but say, whose kid is this? Yesterday, we were in Walmart because we were doing the grocery shopping, which is something you have to do on a semi-regular basis, especially when you have a toddler. Got to get food. And so we were in Walmart, and Nora did what toddlers do in Walmart. She took off running. That's all she knows what she does. She sees something and she goes. She took off running, and so naturally I had to go running after her. But before I could get to, I was watching her. She was running past electronics, and she's running, and I see this guy, and he's like standing in the big aisle, and he does one of these. And then he looks. He sees her go running by. She's got enough of a lead that he looks around and sees like, where is this kid's parent? That's the modern day version. Whose kid is this? Whose kid is this? That's running through the store, and then there's me, get back here, hey, and not being listened to. So, if you were in Walmart yesterday, if you heard anything, that was probably me chasing Nora. And so he asked whose kid was this, and all she was doing was running by. And so you have this young boy that does this miraculous thing that causes the army and the king to finally go, whose kid is this? And I wonder, are they asking because they're nervous? I would think Saul might be a little nervous. I mean, a young kid just bested this mighty giant. And Saul knows he's not exactly on good terms with God right now, so maybe he's like, whose kid is this? And yet David has such a humble answer. He says, I'm the son of your servant. Just some guy out in Bethlehem, no big deal. He's got lots of kids. Brothers are over there. Just David. As if he's done nothing. He has just done this miraculous deed, but he answers as if he's done nothing. I'm just the son of your servant. Even though he knows he's been anointed by God. Which is truly the answer to the question. When everybody's asking, whose son is this? Whose kid is this? And David says, I'm just the son of your servant, Jesse. The reality is that David is the child of God with the trust in the Lord to stand up for God. That's whose kid he is. He's the son of God who trusts in God, just as we are all sons and daughters of God who trust in God. And all of the Israelite army were the kids of God, but they didn't have trust to stand up for God. And here is David, still a boy, and he trusts so deeply that he stands up for what God would have him do. He stands up for his people. He stands up for what is right. He stands up against tyranny. He stands up against fear, and he does the unthinkable. And that should ask of us the same question. When we face something that we feel is insurmountable, that is scary, that is overwhelming, that is too much to have to read, or just too much to have to listen to, or too much, whose kid are we? During Lent, we are tasked with looking internally and asking ourselves, who are we? Who am I? Who could I be? Who have I been? We are challenged to look at ourselves and ask ourselves where we can grow and how we can grow and how we've rejected opportunities to grow previously. And sometimes we reject because it's too hard and it's too scary and we don't want to do it and we don't think we can do it. For 40 days, Goliath challenged the army. For 40 days of Lent, we challenge ourselves. And my hope is that for 40 days, we don't see a challenge and retreat from it. That we don't see a challenge to who we are and back away for fear of having to maybe change something about our lives or our worldview or how we live or who we are. Because God is with us if we trust in God. David trusts. He does. And it is hard to do that. It is hard to look in and ask ourselves, do we trust? To honestly do that work. Don't wait until you're faced with your Goliath to ask yourself if you trust in the Lord. But allow yourself to be so formed by God that when your Goliath rises, you already know the answer, that you confidently can face your Goliath and say, I belong to God, and I trust in God. Because if you wait until Goliath shows up to confirm your faith in the Lord, then you may find yourself shirking and shying away, being one of those soldiers who's like, man, that's a lot of money, but oh no, that guy's really big. Don't wait until challenge arises to do the hard work internally. Train yourself, test yourself, so that people would look at you as you walk this earth and ask, whose kid is this? To whom do they belong? Why do they live this way? Why do they act this way? Whose are they? Do the hard work now so that when somebody asks, whose kid are you? You can confidently, securely, and fully answer, I am God's. And I am beautifully and wonderfully made. I am tested and refined, and I have stood up in the face of that which challenges me, and I have bested it because God is on my side. That's whose kid you are. May you have the faith and the confidence to see that in yourself and to live into that each.